Hello, coming to you from the city of eternal winter, Omaha, Nebraska. Welcome to the Out of the Dust podcast. I'm your host, Snow Queen Bryce. Tied with the popular recurring Out of the Dust geek list on Board Game Geek, the Out of the Dust podcast is a bi-weekly podcast that is focused on re-exploring games we play that we hadn't previously played in a year or more. Why did the game get dusty? Why did you decide to dust it off? How does the game compare to how you remembered it? Are you likely to play it more often in the future? These are the questions that we're interested in examining on Out of the Dust. This week on the podcast, episode 81. On the Out of the Dust segment, I'll bring a pair of Stefan Feld games out of the dust, and a contributor will dust off Magical Athlete. On the reaction segment, I discuss Asmodee's acquisition of BGA. On the What I've Been Playing segment, I review Hallertau. On the Obscure Bryce game segment, I review Wars of Marcus Aurelius, and we wrap up the episode with my top 10 disappointing games of 2020 countdown. One of my friends expressed interest to me recently about filling in the gaps of his Stefan Feld experience. Well, I jumped all over that, and have been introducing him to the ones he hasn't played before for a couple of months now. As much as I love Feld, some of his games do get dusty for me, so this was a good chance for me to revisit some of these titles myself. One of them was Roma, which I last played 2 years, 11 months, and 14 days ago. It's on the lower end of the Feld spectrum for me, but that still makes it better than most games in existence, and it's a pleasant two-player-only game diversion. There's some nice tactical stuff going on in the game as timing becomes more and more important as the game develops, and trying to trigger cards at the perfect opportune moment can really flip the momentum from one player to another. The cards are fun to try to combo together, and deciding how to use each dice is an engaging exercise in strategic decision-making. As one of his earlier titles, Roma also feels quite unique from many of his later ones, which is another point in its favor to revisit from time to time. I also brought Bora Bora, one of the most highly esteemed Feld games, out of the dust. I last played it 2 years, 3 months, and 18 days ago. This is what I wouldn't mind playing more often, but I know exactly why it doesn't hit the table more often. Lots of setup time to this one, and a lot of between-round maintenance to perform, but it is worth it. The dice-based decision-making has me engaged the whole time, and I love trying to solve the puzzle of figuring out the most effective thing to do with what the dice give me. If I were to rank all of the Feld games, Bora Bora would be just outside the top 5 for me, and I even have some component upgrades for this one in the form of some nice tile bags. This particular play was really good and came down to the wire at the end. It's easy to forget about the fish points at the end, but don't do it! Those fish points are really important! Let's see what a contributor brought out of the dust. Ben Lott, username Balat, brought the infamous Magical Athlete out of the dust. Magical Athlete is a 2002 release from Z-Man Games from designer Takashi Ishida. Ben last played it 2 years, 3 months, and 22 days ago. He writes, "This continues to hold the title as one of the dumbest games that I enjoy playing. The mechanism feels like it shouldn't work, but I find it enjoyable every single time. That being said, people are subjected to a great deal of luck in the game, and that to me someone could be denied any chance at victory through no fault of their own gameplay. I don't particularly care, though, because it's so wacky and fun that even a disastrous game will typically make me laugh. I understand why some others dislike it, but I will play Magical Athlete anytime." Thanks for the contribution, Ben. Magical Athlete is a glaring hole in my board gaming experience, and I don't know anybody who owns it. But it's one I wouldn't mind giving a spin if the opportunity ever arises, just for the novelty of it, if nothing else. Reaction segment time! Hey, we're less than 2 months into the new year, and already Asmodee is in the news again! But instead of acquiring another publisher, this time Asmodee has acquired the free game site Board Game Arena! The public reaction to this has been very diverse. Some people expect this to be a surefire disaster for BGA and are spreading the skies falling alarmism. Others are shrugging their shoulders and dismissing the acquisition as something that won't affect what BGA does at all. The latter reaction is what Asmodee themselves are claiming. Asmodee promises they're not going to alter the optional membership fees, keep most games free, and keep releasing a variety of games from many publishers at a steady clip for online enjoyment. One can't help but be skeptical at this latter bit, though. How are other publishers going to feel about their games profiting Asmodee? Surely some kind of restitution program is going to be necessary going forward. I've got to imagine that some kind of restitution is going to have to be devised for the game developers and site technicians, as these activities were done on a voluntary basis before. In fact, one very real bit of fallout that has already occurred are many game developers pledging not to design anything in the future that would benefit Asmodee, though I wonder if they might change their minds if Asmodee paid them. We'll have to wait a while to see how that sort of behind-the-scenes stuff shakes out. In the meantime, I find myself with a mix of reactions. On the one hand, I definitely think it's unfair to expect this to go badly and spread alarmism. I'd like to believe, Asmodee, that nothing will change and this will wind up being a good thing. Certainly, we could point to some of Asmodee's acquisitions and policies and find evidence of missteps, but there have been positive influences as well. If all goes well, I could totally see how professional management could even increase the output and quality of BGA's releases. In any event, because things could go a lot of different ways, this is something that will definitely be worth following up on later on down the road. This week on the What I've Been Playing segment, I'm going to tell you about Hallertau, the new epic farming worker placement game from epic farming master Uwe Rosenberg and publisher Lookout Games. This one is players farming hops and other ingredients needed to create beer in the Hallertau region of Germany, which was a place I previously knew nothing about, but now feel I know way more than necessary. Uwe is my second favorite designer, so I was going to get this game in any event, but there are some amusing, eye-catching elements about the box that would have attracted attention otherwise. First, the box advertises the game as expert level, which, as far as I know, is the first time Lookout has used this label on a game. It's a nice little stroke of ego as I play the game knowing I'm capable of expert level gaming. On the back of the box, various selling points are highlighted, including an element labeled as sheep with an expiration date! In other words, the game features sheep that die. I don't know why Lookout thinks that's a selling point, but there you go. Anyway, here's how it works. Hallertau's worker placement board features 20 worker placement locations divided into 2 or 3 rows each. When a player wants to take an action, they place workers in the bottommost row available, which will either require 1, 2, or 3 workers, depending on how many people have taken the action already this round. The actions will grant players crops the ability to plant those crops in fields, acquire sheep, get sheep-related products from their sheep, draw 1 of 4 types of cards, or gain a certain number of other resources. After the worker placement phase in a round, players milk their sheep. Sheep milk. Harvest their planted crops, which decreases the yield potential of their fields, and increase the yield potential of fields that didn't have crops planted in them. The last part of a round tasks players with spending all of those resources, crops, and animal products they've been collecting to increase the value of their various craft building tiles. Each of the 5 craft buildings are situated on a row, divided into spaces, and improving a craft building to a more valuable space entails spending particular combinations and quantities of resources, crops, and animal products depending on the craft building in question and what round it is, as improving these buildings gets more and more expensive as the game progresses. In addition, large boulders on the improvement track must be moved with tool tokens in order to improve a building more than once a round. Improving a craft building enough will score victory points at the end of the game, but more importantly is that when all 5 buildings are improved to the same step, then the player's large community center tile is also automatically improved by sliding over on the same grid of tracks. The more the community center is improved, the more workers a player gets at the beginning of a round, and if it is improved enough, it is also worth points at the end of the game. Fabulous amounts of points, in fact. The cards I mentioned come in 4 varieties and encourage a player to either spot or spend resources, crops, and or animal products in exchange for immediate benefits, production abilities, more cards, and points. At the end of 6 rounds, the player with the most points becomes the best beer farmer or something and wins the game. Well, I'll get right to the point. Hallertau is the epic farming game gamers have been waiting years for now. Not since Feast for Odin 5 years ago have we gotten a game of this scope and magnitude from Uwe. I've enjoyed all of his games since then, but it is very satisfying to finally get a big, beefy game like this from him again. I've enjoyed all of my plays thoroughly, but one word of caution. For the love of God, please ignore the no cards variant that Uwe includes in the rulebook for some reason. The cards are a huge part of this game, and playing without them is just not interesting at all. Much of my enjoyment of the game has come through manipulating my personal board state to satisfy many card play requirements at once, amassing a bunch of production cards and figuring out how to most effectively chain the benefits of one card into paying for the cost of another. There are a lot of card combo possibilities in this game, and exploring them is a massive amount to the game's fun factor and replayability. Like many of Uwe's titles, there are multiple decks of cards within each type to foster even more replayability, and like Agricola and Newsfjord, I imagine we're going to see several card-based expansions for this game, sooner rather than later. So Hallertau is a big winner for me. The cards are tons of fun, but I also enjoy the field manipulation mechanic and improving those craft buildings and community center is very satisfying and rewarding because it feels genuinely challenging to do those things at times. The solo mode even works well, though I'm going to have to up the difficulty for myself as I've been blowing past the point win threshold so far. It's early in the year, but I think Hallertau is going to be remembered on a lot of people's top 10 lists at the end of the year, and I think it will be a Game of the Year contender for many people as well. Obscure Bryce game segment time. This week on this segment I'm going to tell you about Wars of Marcus Aurelius, a solo war game from designer Robert Daleski and publisher Hallertau. This is a publisher I just recently found out about after I saw a deal they were running back in December on the Hot Deals BGG thread. I wound up getting this in a game called Dinosaur Table Battles from them. A couple of things caught my attention about this particular offering from the website. First, it's part of the States of Siege series, a series I've mentioned before on this podcast, and includes entries like Mound Builders and Zulus on the Ramparts. These are essentially tower defense games, a genre I've had a lot of fun with, and one I think works particularly well as a solo game. This series also tends to dip into some little explored historical themes, which I appreciate. I'm fascinated by Roman history, and I've read Marcus Aurelius in the past, so the theme of Daleski's take on the States of Siege was definitely very appealing. Here's how it works. Each round represents a year of history and is divided into seasons. While the invading German forces always draw the same number of cards from their deck to determine what their forces do, the Romans, who the player plays as, draws fewer and fewer cards each season, representing their resource and supply trains becoming strained during the fall and winter seasons. The invading Germans are divided into 3 tribes, and each advances closer and closer to Rome along their own path as their cards dictate. Some of the German cards challenge the player in other ways, sparking uprisings in the far reaches of the Empire and adjusting other tracks the player must manage, like popularity. Meanwhile, the player's cards, which are multi-use, can either be used for their game text effect or discarded to trigger an action from a menu of options. This menu enables a player to move their legions about the board, favorably adjust their popularity, establish forts, and attack the invaders in an effort to push them back to their homelands. If a player is successful in pushing all 3 tribes back to their respective homelands, the player wins. Otherwise, if any one tribe reaches Rome, any tribes are still unrepelled at the end of 10 years, or Marcus's popularity falls to 0, which represents him being overthrown, the player loses. A scoring table that takes into account how fast a player won or lost and how many historical events they recreated lets a player know to what degree they won or lost. Compared to other entries in the States of Siege series, the Wars of Marcus Aurelius is by far the most accessible I've encountered. The game might be a tad lighter than other ones in the series, but I think Collinspiel just did a great job creating a streamlined rulebook compared to Victory Point's efforts. It was really easy to get into the game, it flowed well my first game, and repeated plays have required little rules refreshing. The hallmark of the series is its emphasis on history, and the historical theme comes across strongly in this entry as well. I learned a lot from playing the game, and it was all interesting stuff. As for the mechanics, I really enjoyed how this entry used multi-use cards, which is not something any of the other games in the series that I've played does at all. Multi-use cards are actually one of my favorite mechanics, and they work well here. I love the decision inherent in using a card for its event or for one of the action menu options. That adds a lot to the replayability of the game and makes me consider how I will approach the game next after I rack up another loss. Because there is a genuine challenge in the game too. In fact, I haven't won yet. Just when things are looking promising, the last of my popularity gets depleted and I get deposed again. I guess I wouldn't make a very good emperor. But challenge is a good thing in a solo game because it keeps me coming back for more. The designer only has one other game to his credit, a re-implementation of Wars of Marcus Aurelius in fact. And due to how well Wars of Marcus Aurelius has gone over, I am putting the re-implementation on my wish list too. This episode, I'm going to count down my top 10 disappointments of 2020. These were all new-to-me games, and some were released in 2020 and some of them before that. I actually only have 7 of them, which is a good thing. Despite the high quantity of games I learned over the course of the year, very few of them wound up being disappointments. But here are the ones that did leave a bad taste in my mouth. Number 7, Downforce. Racing games have never been very successful with me, and this one fell as flat for me as most of the rest have. When this was released on BGA, my friends and I gave it a try several weeks in a row as our opening game. But we found the decisions obvious and the winner too easy to predict and bet on. None in my group have requested it for a month now, and I don't think any of them are likely to again. Number 6, Zoodlums. This is an obscure Kickstarter game I was given, and I had some hope for it because of the fun zoo-building theme and card play, but for what's supposed to be a family game, the rule set is too convoluted and the card play too deliberate and tedious. The pace was just all wrong on this one, and it's easy to see why this game has remained in obscurity since its fulfillment, and why it was given away for that matter. Number 5, Secret Moon, another BGA release that missed the mark for my online group. To be fair, as a social deduction game, which is one of my least favorite genres, I really wasn't expecting much from this game to begin with, but it qualifies for this list for failing to live up to even those low standards. Just a completely boring game with uninteresting and unrewarding deduction. Number 4, the Sonic X trading card game. My son is a big Sonic fan, so I thought it would be fun to track down this old TCG for his birthday. Turns out there's a reason the Sonic X TCG never got any expansions. Because it's not any good! The biggest problem is that the game isn't thematic at all. There's nothing about the system that feels like Sonic. The Sonic IP is completely wasted on this game, which is a shame. Number 3, Reggae Revolution. Oh wow, was I ever excited for this game. I even made a Facebook post letting other people know of the existence of this game when I found out about it based on the theme alone. That's such a cool, unique theme. But the game feels unplay-tested, unrefined, and has some serious logistical issues in tracking what resources have been used for what functions, which just completely wrecks the experience. I played another game by the same publisher later in the year, and that game had the same problems as well. Rainbow Starlight is not a publisher I will be paying attention to in the future as a result. Number 2, Battalia. I discovered this game when it was featured in the Name That Game BGG thread. I looked into it more and added it to my wishlist when it sounded like it would be something I'd enjoy. Coincidentally, a local seller was parting with their all-in Kickstarter pledge shortly afterwards, and I got the entire run of the game for a good deal. But it was a disaster with my wife and my main game group. They all had the same complaint, which I share. For a deck builder, most of the cards are way too limited in what they can do, and it's excessively difficult to accomplish anything consistently productive with them. This leads to an experience that is more frustrating than fun, but my investment into the game did pay off, as I was able to recently swap it for the Grail-felt game Dribble Fever! Number 1, Pax Pamir. I should have trusted my initial inclination to skip this one. Despite the attractive historical theme, I wasn't going to originally try it at all, since the Pax series is something I've purposely avoided due to Phil Eklund's influence. But after the rave reviews, I pre-ordered a second edition copy and tried it out multiple times at a variety of player counts. I found the solo mode easy to manipulate and uninteresting as a result. I found the two-player game devoid of strategic decisions, left deterministic and boring because of that. Multiplayer for me was either over way too quickly or bogged down into a tedious slog. I thought the drafting obvious, the area control largely disconnected from the rest of the game, the tableau building and hand management frustratingly limited, the action menu consisting mostly of uninteresting options, and the endgame and scoring mechanic problematic in its creation of easy-to-predict winners and lack of viable options for those who fall behind to ever come back. After giving it what I consider a fair shake, the game has left my collection with no regret. On the upside, due to its baffling popularity and current scarcity, I got more in return than what I paid for it, so at least it was a good investment in that sense. I feel incredibly let down by the experience it offered, though. It captures the unenviable number 1 most disappointing game of 2020 position for me. Pax Pamir is not a game I will be seeking any more plays of, and if anyone else suggests it to me, I will try to talk them out of it. Just for good measure, between Pax Pamir and Root, I'm also happy to declare Cole Worley my new number 1 most overrated designer of all time. Well, that will do it for episode 81. Thanks for listening. Feel free to join the Out of the Dust Podcast Guild at BoardGameGeek.com. Follow the podcast on Twitter at Out of the Dust BGG. Leave a comment at the Guild. PM me on BGG under user handle Radagast14 or user handle AndLee14. Or email me at radagast14 at CenturyLink.net. And join the Out of the Dust conversation yourself at our monthly geek list at BGG. Alright, play me out, Ananda!